Okay. Good morning, everyone. Um, I'm just going to hold on, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction myself. I know I was here, I think about 2 weeks ago, like Melissa said, but just want to, in case anyone hasn't met me, give another brief little introduction of myself. So my name's Adriana. I am the youth clinical social worker at JFCS. So I work with individuals who are about the age of 10 to 18 and some people who are over the age of 18 as well. I provide individual therapy and sometimes family therapy as well. Um, so that's kind of a brief introduction. Why don't we get started? So the first thing I just wanted to go over just an overview of what we'll be discussing for today. One of the first things is I wanted to provide an introduction to social work and therapy as a path for those who might be interested. So we'll spend a little bit of time. I'll save some time for questions if anyone does have any questions. And then we can move on to talking about what is autonomy. I apologize if this is something you already went over this morning, but it's something we'll probably go into a little bit more in depth. And also, how does autonomy apply to mental health? So then we'll move on to defining autonomy together. And trying to come up with the definition together. So instead of just like reading off, maybe Google like what is autonomy, actually gaining a better understanding for all of us. We'll move on to looking at an activity called what we can control versus what we can't control. At this point, I'm going to have you guys go into breakout groups just to have a smaller discussion. We are going to have a lot of discussions with the larger group, but I think sometimes it's nicer to have just a smaller group being able to discuss some of these things. We'll move on to talking about setting up personal boundaries and looking at, what are boundaries and how can they be useful when we're thinking about autonomy. We'll practice a little bit using boundaries. I have, an example that we're all gonna kind of work through and see how we each would like to use boundaries and understanding like language related to boundaries. And then we'll wrap up talking about why boundaries are important, why boundaries are important to each of us. So that might look different for everybody. Okay, let me get myself situated. For some reason, my screen, oh, there it goes. Okay. So first thing, like I said, just want to go over the path to social work, a possible path. The first thing would just be talking about a bachelor's degree in social work, which is also known as a BSW. Most colleges have social work programs in their four-year colleges. So you really have options wherever, school you'd like to go. Typically, for a bachelor's degree in social work, you would be looking at jobs that are more in kind of direct service work, for instance, doing case management. You might be working in family services. You could be working in a nursing home, a hospital, a drug and alcohol program. And so it really varies what you can do with a BSW. If you were interested in pursuing a master's degree in social work, which would include being able to have a wider range, I think, of jobs. Most programs require that you have a bachelor's degree. It can be a bachelor's degree in social work, but it's not necessary. The bonus of having a bachelor's degree in social work is that you can actually be in the master's program for only a year compared to the program usually is about 2 to 3 years, depending if you're part-time or full-time in the program. So that's kind of like the benefit, but it's not necessary. You can really study anything and then go into a master's program. The program does require 2 field placements throughout your time there. So typically your first year, and just to give you an idea, field placement is kind of like an internship. It's a setting where you would like to have an internship of your interest. So maybe it's at a school, it could be at a hospital, wherever you'd like to practice. The first year, it would be 2 8-hour work days that you're required each week. And then your second year field placement or internship is 3 8-hour work days each week. The master programs of social work, they have 2 kind of tracks of study. There's macro social work and then clinical social work. Macro social work would include, it kind of means like big, so it means like practice studying policy. And then you would have clinical social work track, which is where you might be interested in doing maybe more like counseling or therapy. So you definitely have options of what you'd like to study in the program. And then to give everyone just an example for myself and what it looked like for me, I went to community college and then I went to Temple and I studied sociology and history, and I got my bachelor's degree in sociology. And then I decided I was interested in social work and I kind of shift, and it was no problem that I didn't study social work. I was able to get into a master's program, and I did focus more on a clinical track. So that was my goal of wanting to eventually be able to practice and be a therapist. And once I graduated, which I was part-time, so it did take 3 years, I was able to work part-time during the program as well. And once I graduated, I was able to find a job as a therapist at a behavioral health center. So pretty soon after graduating, I was able to start practicing as a therapist. Okay. Sorry, there's a delay in the slides, I think. Or my screen is frozen.
No, your screen isn't frozen. Well, not your
I
Zoom
know.
screen.
I don't know why it won't
Mine does that sometimes too.
move on.
When you go to the bottom and see the little shadow, does that show up like a
Yeah,
little?
nothing's even showing up at the bottom.
Yeah, a lot of times if you move your cursor around the bottom, there's like a
Yeah,
little shadow in the corner.
I know, that's what I'm looking at, but maybe I'll exit out of
Okay.
the
Try
full
hitting the
screen.
space bar. That might
The
make
space bar. Okay, that did not work either.
It must be a frozen PowerPoint. Yeah, if you can probably
Okay,
stop
I'm gonna
sharing and then go
stop.
back in. Yeah, it's probably the best thing.
Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. So options for social work in terms of career is pretty broad. There are a lot of different settings that you can choose from. And a lot of this comes from being able to choose an internship and be able to decide what you're interested in. So some of the options, I'm sure there's more. I tried to find a comprehensive list, but it's very long. Um, some options would be that you can go into the healthcare or do medical social work. That would kind of look like case management. You can go into school social work, so working in schools with students. There's family services, substance use and recovery, therapy and counseling, policy, and then even human resources as well. Um, so lots of options. And again, like you can kind of shift between, you might, like I started out actually in school social work, ended up moving to therapy and counseling. I wasn't really stuck in any particular role. I've known people who've maybe started in more policy and then were like, I actually want to be doing therapy, and they were able to switch into therapy and counseling. So definitely the kind of nice thing about a social work degree is you can really end up anywhere and kind of play around with what you're interested in. Right. Um, in terms of becoming a therapist, getting a degree in social work is not the only option. There are other paths and other ways to become a therapist, and this really would vary on your personal interests. So, for instance, there's marriage and family therapists, which they focus mostly on doing family based therapy, couples therapy, um, and that's a separate program from social work. There's licensed professional counseling or LPC. There's art and music therapists, and then clinical or counseling psychologists, and even some psychiatrists as well might be doing therapy. And all of these have different programs and different requirements. And I'm not super familiar with all of those. But if you're interested in art and you're interested in mental health, maybe pursuing art therapy and looking into those programs, that would be, I think, a great way of combining it. So it depends. And I think there's a lot of options according to your interests. Um, I'm just going to save a little bit of time. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat. Also, if you would ever like to talk more, you're welcome maybe to reach out to Melissa, and then Melissa can connect us. I'm always happy to talk more about social work and what that path can look like. Okay, so why don't we jump into now this theme that we have for this week of autonomy. And Melissa, was telling me a little bit before, when everyone was on break, that you have talked about autonomy, I think, before this workshop. So you might have some ideas going around, which I think is going to be great. I just wanted to ask this question of what does autonomy mean? So we're going to start coming up with our own definition. And part of that is just sharing what does autonomy mean? What do we think autonomy means? So if folks can you can come off mute or, drop your answer in the chat. There really is no wrong answer. So, feel free to write whatever you think autonomy means. And you can share maybe what you went over this morning, if you have any ideas from what you talked about earlier. It's a part of adulting. Yeah. So it's like it includes some maybe type of transition in, becoming an adult. Good. Anything else of what people think autonomy means? And this is like what you think. So again, no wrong answers. It's like your understanding of autonomy. Being able to carry yourself in the way that you want. Yeah, I think that's definitely a major aspect of autonomy, is being able to have a way of being yourself, being aware of your decisions. Awesome. Yes. Being able to understand your decisions. I'll just wait for if anyone has anything else Any other things to add to this great list that we already have? Okay. So let's see, I'm going to move on to the next slide. If it will unfreeze again for me, that would be great. No. So I'm discovering if I have the chat open up and the slide, this laptop can't handle that.
We can monitor the chat for you.
Okay, that would be great because I don't know why it keeps
Freezing. It's okay.
freezing. Yeah. Are we back? No.
I see in the chat some people added being aware of your own decisions,
Mm-hmm.
being able to carry yourself in the way you want. I think you said that one.
I apologize, everyone. This is
It's okay. It happens. It's Monday.
part of the yes. Perfect. So we have some really great definitions that people, what they're understanding or what they think autonomy means. And I wanted to just include definitions of autonomy that I found online, because I also was trying to understand, in wanting to set up this workshop today, like what does this mean and how can we apply it to a mental health perspective. So I started out with just like a basic search, and I had three definitions that came up. So one is the quality or state of being self-governing, especially the right of self-government. Two is self-directing freedom, and especially moral independence. And then three, the final one, was a self-governing state. I think that these definitions are including maybe a type of autonomy that is more a political definition, but I think there might still be some value in these definitions. And that's where I kind of highlighted some of these key words in the definition. So self-governing, self-directing freedom, and independence. And I think the folks who shared in the chat highlighted some of these words in their own way, about being able to carry yourself in your own way. It's a part of adulting, so that independence comes in. And I think these definitions, even though they're not exactly going to help us define autonomy in a more mental health or psychology perspective, it still is helpful to see the general themes that come up with autonomy. So I want to keep, working through this definition of understanding autonomy. So I'm going to ask some questions. And again, if people can just share in the chat, that would be great. And if Melissa or someone else can read the chat, because unfortunately I'm scared to open it now, that would be wonderful. So the first question is, what does autonomy look like for you? So this is going to be very different for everybody. Autonomy isn't going to look the same from person to person. So what does maybe autonomy look like for you? And this might be, how do you think that you have autonomy, in your life, or how you'd like to have autonomy? What maybe does that look like?
We're monitoring the chat as well.
Okay.
So AC says being in charge of my own money.
Good. Okay. That's a key thing of, I think having the autonomy over your money is a huge part, and it's a really big part of autonomy when you're in a certain period of your life. So when you are maybe an older adolescent entering more like young adulthood, That money piece is definitely going to come up. Excellent.
So now
Anything
it says
else?
being able to make my own decisions.
Hmm. That's also a huge thing. I think that word decisions is going to come up a lot. Excellent. And then, so another question would be, did anyone else share? I'm sorry, I think I
Yes, there was
saw.
one more that popped up just as you were talking. Caitlin said, for me, it is my way of maturing and coming to my own understanding of my personal decisions, being more aware of my circle of friends or people around me. Yamina said, doing things without asking for help all the time.
Wow, yeah. So those are great. Both of those are amazing examples um, of what autonomy looks like for you. And then, so we kind of answered a little bit that second question of how are you autonomous in your life? Everyone kind of gave great examples, whether it's about making decisions, being in charge of money, having some control over who your friends are. The next question, and this one we might circle back to for other people to share if they didn't get a chance. But this last question, why is autonomy important to you? So all of those other examples that people gave, what maybe is important about having autonomy? And it's okay if people don't know yet. Like I said, I like to try and circle back to this because I think it's an important question.
I just wanted to put, for me, not the team, but it says, it lets me know that I'm trusted when I'm given autonomy.
Yeah, that's really important to feel trusted. And some of those words that came up of feeling like you're in charge, feeling like you have freedom, that also includes, I think, trust.
Someone said, I feel it is important because it enables me to have more power in my life, per se.
Great. Yeah, that piece of like feeling like that you have a sense of power over your life. Awesome. Okay, let's move on. Just gonna kind of summarize a little bit,
And there
wrapping
was
up.
one more
Oh,
popped up. Says, gives me time to really figure out what my interests are and gives me more of a push because I don't have to wait for anyone else.
Yes, definitely. Being able to figure out like what your own interests and have that time to be able to do that. Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Thank you everybody for sharing. Those are really great responses. So just to a little bit summarize what we've been talking about, again, everyone gave, I think, really amazing definitions and meanings and examples of autonomy. Autonomy, basically, it refers to your growing ability to think, feel, make decisions, and act on your own. Again, a lot of people already, I think, gave examples to this. And as Melissa said, Melissa's an adult, I'm an adult, but I think that autonomy is something that I'm continuing to experience, to learn, and to try and have the ability. It is something that happens throughout your life. It starts in more early childhood. So when you're a toddler, typically you want to start making your own decisions. You want to maybe move away from your parent or your guardian and explore things and try things out. So that's really where that autonomy starts in terms of your development, and then it continues. It's going to continue into your adulthood. But I do think there's that very important time of when you're an adolescent into young adulthood where this autonomy is really like it's front and center. It's such a crucial part of that period of our lives. And it really helps us when we are adults to sort of continue that process. So just keep that in mind that it's a continuous part of development and your life. It's not something that really has a beginning and an end. It's just this long process of learning and growing. So there's no, I think, need to have autonomy down pat by the age of 18. Again, I'm an adult and I'm still, I think, trying to work out my ability to have, to think, and feel and make decisions and act on my own. And so it's always like a growing process. I wanted to go over, there are different types of autonomy. So we sort of had a broader definition of autonomy. This is getting a little bit more specific. So I'm going to go over the 3 types of autonomy that I think are very important. There is emotional autonomy. So this is going to relate to emotions and your personal feelings and maybe how we relate to other people around us. That's that piece of having the ability to feel and maybe express your emotions on your own. Then there's behavioral autonomy. This really relates to behaviors and the ability to make decisions independently and to follow through on these decisions with action. You know, exactly like it says, it's your ability to be able to make decisions independently. That piece where someone shared, like feeling like I'm in charge. That's really that behavioral autonomy. And then we have value autonomy. So this means having independent attitudes and beliefs regarding spirituality, politics, and morals. I do want to just note that this can be a little bit complicated for value autonomy, behavioral autonomy, and emotional autonomy, because we, even though we're individuals, we don't exist in this isolated world. We have family, we have community, we have friends, and all of those important people make up who we are and help shape who we are. So value autonomy, even though it means that you can have independent attitudes and beliefs regarding spirituality, religion, politics, and morals, sometimes this is influenced by the people in your lives. So maybe your family or your friends, people at school. That doesn't mean if you are influenced or have learned from people in your lives that are not practicing value autonomy. I think value autonomy is to be able to interact and reflect on those beliefs or those attitudes. So it's not so much you have to come up with your own, but more so just having a greater understanding maybe of where that comes from. So I just wanted to include that you know, being autonomous doesn't mean that you're completely separate from the communities or, you know, your family. Those are important parts of how to be autonomous. So let's see. I just want everyone, if they can, very, very simple, to drop in the chat a yes or no in response to this question. And I also included maybe, because there might be some people who are like, I'm not exactly sure if it's yes or no. But has there ever been a situation where maybe it was challenging to have autonomy in your life? I'm seeing some
Yeah, you're getting a
questions
lot of
pop through.
yeses.
Getting a lot of yeses. Yeah. Okay. So yes, there have been situations where it was challenging to have autonomy. Great. I'm seeing a lot coming through, and I unfortunately can't read them, but thank you for everybody who responded. So a lot of yeses to this question. This is where I want to acknowledge that we would like to have autonomy of our lives, whether it's feeling like we can be in charge of our finances or who we are friends with or how we spend our time, where we work. But I want to acknowledge that sometimes it might be challenging to have that autonomy, especially at certain points in our lives. So if you are still maybe living at home or you are very close with your family, or there might be a little bit of a challenge to be autonomous. And I think that it's important to reflect on those times of like, when can I have autonomy, and when maybe might it be a little bit more challenging. And we'll talk about like ways, one way to try and address those challenges. But for now, this is where that breakout group is going to come in. I would like us to look at this, I call it the circle of control, and it's what I can control, and then on the outside of the circle is what I can't control. So these are just some examples of things that I can control. This is something I found online, so it's not mine, but it has some good examples. So maybe being accountable for myself is something I can control. The friends I choose to have, how I respond to challenges. These are things that I can control, and that's maybe where I can have a little bit more autonomy in my life. On the outside of the circle, again, these are things that maybe I don't have control over. It can always change over time, but generally this is going to be situations or things or people that I don't have control over. So one is if someone else keeps trying. So if someone else is encountering a challenge, how they respond to it is not really, something I can control. What else? Do we have others taking care of themselves? This is something that I can't really control. So what I would like us to do in our breakout groups, take a look at this for just a minute, just to help get some ideas of what are some things that you can control, and then what are some things you can't control. And in the breakout group, we're just going to have a brief discussion, like a couple minutes, just sharing like what are some things that I do control in my life, and what are the things that I can't control. This, can look however you would like. You're welcome to use some of the examples because I think that these can be relevant for anyone. But also, if you have things that are not on here, please share those. I think it's great to hear what are the things that we all have control over in our lives and what do we not. So yeah, we're just going to spend a couple minutes discussing those in the breakout groups. Let's see. So now that we're all returning as a larger group, and thank you everyone for participating in the breakout groups. I know sometimes breakout groups can be a little bit tough, especially on a Monday morning. So I really, really appreciate you cooperating with me on that. I know my group had some really great discussion on the things that we can control and the things that we can't control, and really looking at also how we maybe feel about those situations. When we can't control something, how do we react to that? So in the wider group, I just wanted to check in and get a few maybe responses of just sharing, what are some things that you can control and what are some things that you can't control. So if people can just share a few examples in the chat of what maybe they discussed in their breakout group. What were those examples of things that you can control and things that you can't control in your life?
So I actually took notes in for our breakout room.
Oh, great.
But some of the things that they said were, I can control how I carry myself, but I can't control what people think of me. I can control my responses, but I can't control other people's responses.
Yeah.
I can control how I treat others. I can control what goes, I can't control what goes on in the world, but I can control what goes on in my home. I can control my attitude, but not other people's reactions. I can control my own effort in a relationship, but I can't control other people's efforts in that relationship. I can control my actions, but not how others act around me. I can control how I manage my time at work and my performance, but not other people's expectations of me.
Okay.
And that was, I can control how I help others, but not how others receive my help.
Wow. Those were amazing examples. That sounds like a great discussion. I definitely feel like in your group, it sounds like people went maybe outside of this little, example and gave really personal examples of what they feel like they can control and what they can't. And there was similar themes I know in my group that came up of what we can control and what we can't control. Great. So let's move on. I'm just trying to pay attention to the time because I want to save enough time for us to talk about setting boundaries. And I really view setting boundaries as just one maybe way of helping us to achieve more autonomy in our lives. And to maybe with some of those things that we can't control, or the things that we can control, I think boundaries can be used with some of those to help us. Obviously, some of the things that we can't control, it does require some acceptance of the situation, which in my group we talked about is challenging to be able to accept what maybe we can't control. It's not easy. And I think for most people, it's not something that comes extremely easy. But setting boundaries is a way that we can have a little bit more autonomy. So boundaries, one thing that's really important first is to learn and know your boundaries. Much like autonomy, this is something that is going to change and grow and maybe need to be learned and relearned and unlearned all throughout your life. It's not something that is just final and then you can move on. So keep that in mind that maybe your boundaries from one year to the next might look a little different. I think COVID is probably a really good example of a massive change that we all experienced in terms of knowing what are our boundaries. That was something that we did not really have control over, but one thing we do have control over is knowing our boundaries in this, wider situation that's happening. Your boundaries, another really important key piece of boundaries. Your boundaries are yours and yours only, but they could align with those close to you. So your friends, your family, your chosen family, your boundaries might, you notice, align with them. They might not be completely different to those important people in your lives, but they also could be. They could be very different. Boundaries, they're typically based on what's important to you. So that's another really important piece of a boundary, is that it's going to be based on what's important. So if what's important to you, let's say, for example, is to have alone time, your boundaries are going to be based on that. If you really value having like separate time for yourself, just time to like unwind and, have that space, your boundaries might be based on that. So really reflecting on like what's important to you, that's going to be where your boundaries might be coming from. Another thing is everybody has different boundaries. Not everybody's boundaries are the same. And generally, this is just like, it's not exact, but just helpful to see different types of boundaries, to get an idea of maybe like what do our boundaries look like depending on the situation or the person that we're interacting with. There's three types of boundaries. One would be more rigid boundaries. So this maybe is someone who's very protective of sharing their personal information. Maybe they're keeping other people more at a distance, or a particular person at a distance, and they could be maybe less likely to ask for help. So that's if boundaries are more rigid, that's typically how someone would respond. And then we have more porous boundaries. This would maybe look like if someone is oversharing personal information with maybe someone that they just met, they might find it difficult to say no to the requests of others. So really having a hard time putting that no in place when someone is asking them for something. And then a final thing might be that they're over involved with other people's problems. So focusing on other people's problems. This is what those boundaries would look like for someone who is using or practicing more porous boundaries. And then if someone is using or practicing healthy boundaries, this might look like not compromising your values for others. You might value your own opinion and really see how that's important. And then knowing your personal wants and needs. So that really comes into being able to establish healthy boundaries, is being able to reflect on your personal wants and your needs. Everybody maybe shifts throughout these boundaries. Typically, everyone, it's a little more fluid. You might not see someone solely practicing rigid boundaries. They might have rigid boundaries in certain situations with certain people, but then they might have healthy boundaries with other people and other situations. So I don't think that when it comes to boundaries, there's anything wrong about any of these or right. It really depends on the situation. I think what is important is to have awareness over what boundaries am I practicing right now, and does this work for me? And so again, there's nothing wrong with any of these boundaries. There's nothing, even though it says like, healthy boundaries, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's always what you're going to use depending on the situation. So everybody, we all kind of fluctuate between some of these. A little bit more on boundaries, that important things to keep in mind when you're trying to practice and set boundaries in your life. Always important to plan ahead. So think about what you want to say and how you will say it. It's okay to practice to help you feel more confident before entering a difficult situation. So if you are having to set boundaries in a situation or with a person where you feel like it's challenging and it's not coming maybe very easy to you for you, practice, be able to like really work out like what is your boundary. And that piece comes in of like knowing, learning, and understanding like what is your personal needs or wants during that time. Second thing is to try and use confident body language. Face the other person if possible. I know, especially, with COVID, I think a lot of things are happening virtually, so you might not be able to have face to face, but if possible, try and face them. Making eye contact and using a steady tone of voice at kind of an appropriate volume. Basically just being like firm in how you're speaking and how you're holding yourself. This also comes into that planning ahead. I know I sometimes like practicing more like confident body language, because in the moment you might not notice that you're like, I'm not feeling confident right now. But if you're able to practice, it can kind of help you with that. And then the last thing would be, and this, I just like to say, this really, really depends on the situation. This is not a must or a need when you're practicing boundaries. This just comes up depending on the situation. So compromise when appropriate. Try listening to the other person and, to hear their perspective, and maybe understanding their perspective. It can be helpful, and overall just feeling what is right for you. So maybe it might be compromising with the boundary or trying to like play around with it. But I want to be clear, compromising is not always going to come up with boundaries. Sometimes you're going to be very firm. But it is something that can be discussed with someone if you feel comfortable with them and that they are understanding of your feelings too. So that number 3 is, not a given for every situation. Just to give examples of like, what can you say when you're trying to set boundaries with another person or in a situation? And, it's not always easy to just say straight up no. There are situations where that might feel uncomfortable to be like, no. And there are others where I think go for it. Just say no. No works perfectly fine. But to give some examples would be, I'm not comfortable. I can't do that for you. This doesn't work for me. Not at this time, and I've decided not to. So those are varying ways of still being firm and using language to set up boundaries for yourself. And they can be used in different situations, whether it's you're at school, or if you're at work, with friends, with family. I think those kind of work across the board. Let's see. So I want us to practice setting boundaries together. I came up with an example. I might possibly be dating myself by saying that we're calling friends over the phone. I know some people don't do that, but just try and imagine if this situation happened to you. So the example is your friend calls you pretty late to talk about a problem maybe they're having with their significant other, or another friend. But you have class, or let's say you have work early in the morning and you know that you need to go to bed and because you have to wake up early. How can you respond to this friend trying to practice boundaries? And if people can just share a few examples in the chat, that would be great. How would you respond in this situation of trying to set and use boundaries? I think I see one coming in.
Yeah, AC said, let's talk about this tomorrow. She would tell the
Mhm.
person, let's talk about this tomorrow.
Good. Yeah. just setting up like, I'll talk about it, like acknowledging that your friend wants to talk, but putting it to a time where maybe you have the capacity to do that. Excellent. Yeah. I think that's a really to the point way, but also, it's a simple way of setting a boundary. And this is an example where you're really looking at what are your needs in the situation. Your needs are that you have to wake up early and you really can't be talking to your friend about their problems right now. So you're knowing what your needs are, and then you're practicing a way of setting up that boundary. Good. And I'll just wait if anyone else has any other ideas, and then we can move on. Just give folks like a couple more seconds.
So while we wait, okay, Melina says, remind them to call a bit earlier next time.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's great. So that's not only setting a boundary, but also showing like how the person can approach you next time. So you're setting that boundary of, call me earlier because this is my need. My need is that I need to go to bed earlier. Great.
I was going to say, to really on both those answers, sometimes just to let the person know that you care, you can like say that, but then also kind of say to them like, I really understand this is a tough time for you, and I really want to talk to you when I'm, clear and can give you all my attention. So let's talk about this tomorrow. So like
Yeah.
saying that, but not just so like, maybe not so abruptly, but letting the
Yeah.
person know like,
Yeah.
I do care. This is just not a good time.
Yes, exactly. I think that's what boundaries, they can be somewhat tricky for us because sometimes we need to set boundaries with the people that we care about. So it's not always setting a boundary in a situation where we're just like, no, I don't want to do this. It can be, I really care about this person, but I just can't support them, or I can't do this. So definitely, yeah, Melissa's right that acknowledging and showing that you maybe care about the person, but also showing your need or your feelings in that situation. And of course, your friends or family or coworkers, if they care about you too, they'll be able to hear your perspective. Great. Okay. So final, I think, question for today as we wrap up is why, and Melissa kind of talked about this, but why is it important to practice setting boundaries in all areas of your life, whether it's with friends, family, at school, work situation? Why might it be important to practice boundaries? And again, people could just share in the chat what they think about why is it important to you, or why is it important to set boundaries?
There's one response in the chat says, so people don't walk all over you.
Mm-hmm. So setting boundaries and being firm maybe helps you not feel like people are maybe taking advantage of you. Yeah, I think that definitely is an important part of practicing boundaries.
Yeah, not be taken advantage of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's important so you don't stretch yourself too thin.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we try to be there for everybody and be that great friend, but then we find out that we're the ones that's kind of depleted and kind of feel like nobody's pouring into us. So sometimes you just have to take some time for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then just to kind of wrap up and highlight, part of what Melissa just said is what's important about practicing boundaries is also it's to help you practice self-care and self-respect, to communicate your needs in a relationship or relationships, to make time and space for positive interactions, and to set limits in a relationship in a way that is healthy for you. So those are just kind of some of the other reasons, in addition to what other people shared, of not feeling like you're being taken advantage of, not having people walk all over you, setting time for yourself. So those are all the reasons why practicing boundaries might be important to you. I did include, I just want to thank everybody so much for your participation. I think everyone did an amazing job in the discussion, and thank you for having me. I did also include in, I'm not sure if I can share this PowerPoint, but I did include some examples of how to set boundaries, a few like worksheets that if folks are interested in being able to practice that in their lives, there's going to be a few worksheet examples in the slides.